Hey guys, we're moving into March, which means we have this and one more time that we're going to be studying the Constitution this year. If you haven't been with me the whole time, what I've been doing is following the history of America and the development of it, all the way from the exploration period right up to modern days. And then as we look at the history of America, I'm looking at how the Constitution is impacted, either through preparing to have the Constitution, through developing the Constitution itself, and now we are done in where we are in the history of America. The Constitution has been formed and we have this kind of messy period afterward trying to get things all figured out. So let me just do a review really quickly on what we did last month, and I don't know that I did a great job explaining this to you. So this is all on a YouTube channel called In the Constitution, and that's all just one word. Jeff Hymas is the name of the man who put this together, and it is called the Constitution B. And when I did it originally, it was a little bit of a mess as far as videos go, and when I looked at it this time, it was just all cleaned up and really nice, had a very beautiful playlist. We only did one video per week, and it was just really beautiful. Letting you know just an overview of what they learned in there. The different articles in the Constitution, there are 7 articles. The articles are, first article is legislative, second is executive, third, judicial, fourth, the states, 5th, amendments, 6th, supremacy, and 7th is ratification. So that's just kind of an overview of the different things that are in the Constitution. It's not that hard, right? I feel like the Constitution often feels huge and hard to understand and super complicated. It's not. It's not a huge document, and it doesn't even cover that much stuff. I think that's really the point. It is the document that governs the federal government, which should be very, very limited. So after he talked to them about that, he went over the 5 most misunderstood clauses that are in our Constitution, and they are the Supremacy Clause, the Treaty Law Clause, the Interstate Commerce Clause, the Necessary and Proper Clause, and General Welfare Clause. And so the kids went through and they memorized each of those clauses, they highlighted them in their constitutions, and then they talked about what they meant and how they're being misconstrued today. So if you haven't taken the chance to look at that, do that now. Like, don't do anything else in March. Do the Constitution B. It is the best resource that I have found to be able to teach kids what is actually in the Constitution, from the structure all the way down into the nuts and bolts of what it means to be free and the different aspects of that Constitution. They have another version that's for older kids, which is basically the same thing. He just took out all of the games. And so it's the same knowledge, the same information, but it's just a little bit leveled up so that it doesn't feel quite so young. So at this point, we've really formed the Constitution, and it's going for ratification, that all of the different states have an opportunity to decide whether or not they want to buy into this new form of government. And one of the biggest problems that most states had with this, well, I shouldn't say that. A lot of states were very worried about there being a large federal government. That was a big problem that they had with it. But another one of the big problems that a lot of people felt was that if we do agree to have this very large government, what's going to keep them from taking away our rights? And a lot of the framers of the Constitution felt like, well, the checks and balances are going to protect it. You know, we went through and we said Article 1, Section 8, there are these 17 things that you can do as a federal government and nothing else. It's just those 17 things. How could we possibly go wrong? And then, you know, on the other side of it, they've got people who are like, well, I don't know, England, it could go wrong. I feel like we need to have a more specific set of things where you say, the government cannot encroach on these areas. And, you know, it just kind of went back and forth and back and forth. And one of the arguments was, if we write down a list of these things that say the government cannot encroach in these areas, doesn't that basically say these are your only rights? And as long as the government doesn't take away those rights, then everything else is fair game. So the way that they dealt with that was actually the 9th and 10th Amendments, that they said, if it's not listed here, it still exists. You can't do it. You can't just take over any other right. You can't just assume that this is the list that contains all of our rights, right? We're just saying specifically from what we've just gone through, don't encroach on these particular rights. And they didn't come up with them super easily, right? They went to all the different states, and all the states put in lots and lots of ideas for these amendments for this Bill of Rights. And they whittled it down because a lot of them were, the states said the same thing, right? We want the right of religion. We want the right to assemble. We want the right to keep and bear arms, right? These are all things that we just lived through, and so we want these specifically stated. So the first thing they did is they just looked at them and said, we're going to gather all of them that are the same and just combine those. So that whittled it down quite a lot. And then there were others that they felt like, well, that's not exactly the same thing, but we feel like this way that we've worded it protects you enough. And so they got rid of a bunch more that way. And they just whittled it down and down until they got to 10. And they felt like these 10 really encapsulate the ideas that all of the states have put together that they're most concerned about, making sure that these particular rights are taken care of. So this month, we're really going to go over what are in each of those amendments. If you're like me, you don't have them memorized. So here we go. Amendment number 1. This is the free speech, right? You cannot pass laws that forbid us from practicing our own religion, from our freedom of speech, our freedom of the press, the right to gather, or to disagree with the government and say, we don't agree with what just went down there. All of that is lumped into the first one, which is why I feel like the first is like so important. They're like, these are the powerful, really, really important ones. The second one, also well known, you shall have the right to bear guns legally. The Third Amendment is really interesting because it just hasn't happened for so long, but it was such a huge problem for them that they put it in the 10 most important things. They said, you cannot quarter your military in our homes. In other words, you can't have the army come in and live inside our houses. You can't say that we have to provide housing or food or space for them because, you know, that's another thing that if you want to gather and be rebellious, it's really hard if you have the military living in your house. And so they said, you can't do that. That is an important one. The fourth one says that Americans cannot have their personal property searched without a proper warrant and just cause. You need to get a warrant if you're going to have any sort of search or seizure in any situation. The fifth one, often we will hear, I claim the fifth, and that's in this, but there's more in the Fifth Amendment. So we cannot be forced to be a witness against ourselves, right? So you can't ask somebody in a court of law to say, hey, you have to testify in a way that's going to condemn you. No, you can't do that. The Fifth Amendment protects you from doing that. But you can also not be tried for the same crime twice. You are protected from that in the Fifth Amendment. You cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without proper trial. Moving on to the Sixth Amendment, it says, we all deserve the right to a fair trial, which includes an impartial jury, an opportunity to question witnesses against them, and to find witnesses in favor of them, and access to an attorney, right? So this is why if you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. It's because right here, the Sixth Amendment says you have the right to an attorney. That's your right. It's not based on how much money you're making. You have that right. And the idea that you get an impartial jury of your peers is also really important. And it's right here in the Constitution. I feel like in a lot of ways, we are more aware of what's in the Bill of Rights as far as, hey, I know what my rights are, but we don't necessarily know how to point to it and say, well, that's the Sixth Amendment. But now you know, that one is the Sixth. The seventh is also connected to our rights, but if we're being sued, it says that if you are going into a civil trial, you have the right to be tried by a jury, even if it's just about money. It's not about your life being on the line or you going to jail at all. You still have the right to be tried by a jury of your peers. And the eighth one kind of follows the same vein. I think it's really interesting that the first couple have nothing to do with whether you're going to court. It's just the ability to live and be in free society and how we're going to interact with each other. And then as you go along, it starts saying, but if you do start being in a situation where you're being sued for something, you have specific rights around that as well. So a smaller group of people, but still having those rights protected. The eighth one says you are protected from excessively high bail and from fines and brutal punishments, right? This is the no cruel or unusual punishments shall be exacted. And man, England had some seriously cruel and unusual punishments. So that's where that's coming from, is the idea that we don't want to be drawn and quartered and, you know, hung until we're almost dead and then revived and then killed again, that was on the books. That's how they did it for treason. Oh my goodness. They said, we're done with that. If you're going to have to kill somebody, it's just going to be quick and none of this crazy, cruel, and unusual stuff. And the Ninth Amendment, like I said before, is kind of that catch-all. It says that just because we listed these doesn't mean that these are the only rights that they have. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. There are other rights. The people have these other rights as well. Just because we only listed these ones does not mean that these are all of the rights that they have. And then the 10th one really kind of, goes in that same vein, but the idea is that if you don't have this right specifically enumerated, federal government, I'm talking to you, if you don't have the right listed in the Constitution, then you cannot do it. This is kind of the handcuffs for the federal government. It's just reminding them this is where your limitation is. There are a total of 27 amendments to our Constitution. 2 of them reverse each other. That's prohibition. And they made an amendment and then they said, nope, we're going to make another amendment to get rid of that and cancel that out. But the other 25 do actually amend the Constitution and make it different. And we have the right and the ability to continue amending the Constitution. So when it comes to actually going over what we're doing for the Bill of Rights teaching in this month, we are going to have an overview, which is a YouTube video, and then there's a lesson that the National Center for Constitution, I think is what it's called. They put together this lesson, and I have the links, I'll put the links down below. And so we're going to be doing that lesson. I just don't think that's going to be enough to fill up our time and talk about everything that needs to be told as far as the amendments. So we might go into the other amendments as well and talk about, what are they and how they have impacted things and get a little bit deeper into the amendments that way. I think that this is an important part to be able to talk about not just the original document and even not just the Bill of Rights, but all of the amendments that have gone into it. I hope this has been helpful. You are doing really, really important things as a mom and as a dad. It is vitally important, the stabilizing force that you bring to your kids' world and to all of society. You're doing a really, really important job and you're doing much better than you think you are. Keep it up and I'll see you on the next one.